Hey everybody, it's Kneecap here, and in this video, I'm going to be talking about how I would go about making Retribution Paladin more fun or better to play in Dragonflight. So this is actually something I was asked while I was streaming a Mythic raid progression on how I would make Paladin better. Not necessarily for Dragonflight, but obviously they're not going to do any kind of revamp right now. So if we're going to get anything, it would be in the next expansion. And I was thinking, and I gave a quick off the cuff answer, which I still think is a good answer, but that I would, reimagine how we work in general, just in that I think our single target is built pretty fine, but then our multi-target AoE is built very, very poorly. And so I would change that essentially to where, you're not casting all single target spells or, attacks, whatever, and to generate holy power to then do your one AoE ability in Divine Storm. So I thought about that. So that's not the only thing though. So I put more thought into it after that. And that's not the only thing I would do, of course. I think another thing that would be really nice. So I mentioned that I think the single target's pretty good already. Now, for most of this expansion, or for the first half of it, I guess it'll end up being, we ran Execution Sentence with Final Reckoning and Seraphim, generally for pretty much everything, because the single target damage was really, 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 really good, and you could still cleave off of it if you wanted to. But yeah, this was just such a good setup for single target. Now, the reality is that while it was the best, it wasn't like magnitudes better than some other talent setups. It was just noticeably better, let's say. So it was definitely what you wanted to use, but it wasn't ridiculously better in a way that some talents are, or some classes or specs talents are just ridiculously better. So it was the best, but it wasn't ridiculously better. So what I would do is I would kind of make this, or you could have different versions of it, right? It doesn't even have to be the same abilities, but have a setup to where the single target is just massive. If you're doing a raid fight like Skull-X, or you're the single target person in your Mythic Plus team, like you have two absolute pumpers for AoE, and you're all friends or whatever, so they know your damage is going to be lower, but you're the single target, you're the tyrannical boss damage doer. You can just take this full single target build, and it's just absolutely pumps. Not like 20% higher than everyone else, but like just if you can do this and do it correctly, you get to pump and do a lot of damage. And that's the other part of this. So I would say the Execution Sentence Final Reckoning build also limited the amount of paladins who could actually do that, just because it does take a little bit of timing. For some people, it takes a weak aura to kind of track things, or tell you what spells to cast. And the majority of the player base isn't going to do that. So this build wasn't even really an option, I would say. Obviously, for all the endgame players, it was. But for the general player base, this Execution Sentence build isn't even really an option, because you're not going to fit your globals into it perfectly. And in which case, as soon as you don't fit your globals in perfectly, these other talent setups become better than the single target one. So number one, I would just make the single target thing automatically better. I would maybe be slightly more forgiving with the time, not enough to where you're getting like, maybe that's where like the explosive damage comes in, to where we're like a top 4 or 5 single target damage doer if you do it perfectly. But then even if you don't do it perfectly, you're still like competitive with the other classes. You're still like middle of the pack if you don't do it correctly. And then if you choose a different talent set, it can be noticeably lower for pure single target. Something like that. It doesn't have to be that, but something like that is how I would improve the single target. Because in general, I think the single target is pretty good for ret. But cleave and AoE, that's a whole nother story. So you could do this, and I have this pulled up here. You could do this with like the Dragonflight talent. So I have the Balanced Druid pulled up here. I did a video on on this talent tree particularly already, but I kind of have this pulled up because I view balance out of the Death Knight and Druid possibilities as like the closest thing to ret, how ret plays. So you could have over here on like the single target side. So the way they did Boomkin, at least, sorry about that. The way they did Boomkin, at least, is they kind of did AoE talents on the left here, and multi-target or single target on the right, or just general damage. And so they kind of split it off like that. So maybe somewhere on the right here, towards the bottom, you could empower your execution sentence. So imagine right here where you're choosing between two legendary powers. Imagine as a rep paladin, you could choose empowered execution sentence, which then lets you catapult, if you do it perfectly, towards like a top end single target damage. And even if you don't do it perfectly, you're still doing really good single target damage. I think that would be a really cool option for that, and a cool option of how to do the talents, and a good way to improve our single target damage, and make it feel more cool to play it as well. Because I think I didn't mind this execution sentence build, but it did truly not apply to a lot of the casual player base, really. So let's talk about multi-target and AoE, because that's like the bigger problem, right? This is the thing that most annoys me. I absolutely hate it. Almost everyone else is getting to do some sort of multi-target cast, multi-target spell, while they're building their whatever resource. And we have to do Blade of Justice, Judgment, and Crusader Strike. Not exciting spells to begin with, I would say. And then on top of it, they're only a single target. And I think that's really lame. So I think there's a couple ways to go about doing this. I think number one would be, again, you could do this in a talent if you wanted to, or you could just make it baseline. So what I would do is I would have Judgment hit up to 5 targets. So that's very similar to Divine Toll. So it could like be a little bit, duplicative with Divine Toll and not like make Divine Toll seem as cool. But Divine Toll does like empowered judgments, right? And it's like a more powerful spell and hits a single target more than once, at least with the conduit, which you would assume if they're rolling Divine Toll into Dragonflight, that it would have that conduit attached to it, hopefully. Otherwise, it's going to be kind of lame, and you might not even take it, because it would be pretty lame. So the only option is keep Divine Toll how it is without the conduit and reduce the cooldown to like a normal judgment, or have it replace your judgment, and have it hit 5 targets. So there's multiple ways. Like Divine Toll could be reworked to just be this spell, right? But let's say it's not. Judgment now hits up to 5 targets, and it hits. So right now my judgment hits for like 2,600 or something like that. So if it hits 1 target, it hits for 2,600. If it hits 5 targets, it hits for 5,200 over the 5 targets or something like that. So like double or whatever. Now they probably already have an algorithm or a equation for this for other classes and other specs. So I don't know that would be the correct number. I'm just throwing a number out there. And then so for 4 targets, it would be, slightly less than 5,200. For 3 targets, it would be slightly less than that. For 2 targets, it would be slightly less than that. And then for single target, it would just be the normal amount. You wouldn't get an empowered one on normal. Or you could, like I said, rework the Divine Toll to where you do get an empowered one on normal, but it still does more damage. It does damage to all the targets as well. Now, I'm not saying that Judgment cooldown should then be raised to a minute, because right now it's 10 seconds, and that feels, or for me with my haste and everything, and that feels fine. So you cannot raise it to 1 minute. Judgment should just be able to hit more than one thing. I say 5 targets because if you were just putting the Judgment debuff on every target, for example, that could potentially be too strong. I could see that. But I'm fine with that too. If that's how they work the numbers, all it is a numbers game at the end of the day. If that's how they work their numbers, it would be fine. But I would say up to 5 targets, and then I'd be open to have it being more than that. But up to 5 targets for Judgment, and then also in the same exact way as Judgment, up to 5 targets with Blade of Justice, and call it Blades of Justice. So if it hits 1 target, it hits harder, but it can hit up to 5 targets, still generating 2 holy power. Judgment could still only generate 1 if it hit all 5. If it hit 5, because 5 holy power every 10 seconds would be a little bit overpowered. Even I would say that as a rep paladin. So I'm not so worried about the number of holy power generated, but I just hate that the generators don't hit multiple targets. So you could call that Blades of Justice. Another idea I thought of, and again, that could be talent, or that could just be baseline how the ability works, because there's abilities in World of Warcraft that work differently, just like Divine Toll, based on how many things you hit. So there's an ability in Diablo Immortal, not that I'm endorsing Diablo Immortal, but the Crusader is basically a paladin. They have very good AoE kit in that game, but they have a sweep attack ability, and you could just literally steal this for paladin. This is kind of like a prop paladin ability as well already in the game. so you could just steal that as well. But sweep attack kind of feels nice. I don't really notice, except for the damage numbers, I don't really notice the prop paladin cleave. So, sweep attack you kind of notice. So you could talent into, on the Dragonflight talents, changing your Blade of Justice into like a sweep attack, right? Where you hit up to 5 things, or you hit everything directly in front of you, or whatever, with a sweep attack where you like sweep your weapon across, right? And in Diablo Immortal, it's a flail, but it could just be, your weapon. You sweep it across, you hit everything in front of you naturally, or up to 3 targets, or up to 5 targets, up to 8 targets. Again, however their equations work out would be the number. I'm not here to tell them the numbers to do. But yeah, so I would either have it be Blades of Justice and kind of be a baseline ability, or just augment it with a talent into something new where it's like a sweep attack, or you can call it whatever you want to call it, of course. And so now your builders are doing more damage. And this isn't going to take you from worst to first in damage, but it's just other classes generally get to build with non... there are some other classes that do have this issue, by the way. We're not the only... or other specs. We're not the only ones. But it's just a frustrating thing to build in a single target manner when you're going to be trying to do all AoE damage. It can be a little bit frustrating. My last idea, and this would be like a talent for sure, I think, would be to be able to talent into, so somewhere down here on the AoE side, an empowered consecration. I think this would be kind of a cool idea, right? So empowered consecration. So it's going to greatly increase the damage of your consecration. Maybe it puts it on a little bit more of a cooldown, or not. But the way I envisioned it, because obviously just dropping it on the ground and having it do a ton of damage is a little bit much. But what if you channeled it similar to like a Rain of Fire or a Blizzard or something like that? You're a paladin, so you put your hand up in the air, you call upon the light, and you sit there just channeling a consecration that does like a lot more damage, kind of like almost like a Hellfire from a warlock in a way. And you do this empowered consecration that does good damage. So you would use this, if you're not going to be moving at all, right? Because, moving would cancel your empowered consecration. But if you get to sit there and cast the whole thing, or channel the whole thing, then it could be a very good stand and plant AoE ability. That's another thing that I think would be really good, especially for certain Mythic Plus pulls, definitely for some raid bosses it would be good for. And not all of them, though, right? So you wouldn't always use it, because there'd be some times where you have to move or run out where you might not want to use it, because you would design the spell in a way to where you only get the max damage out of it if you're able to channel the whole spell. Maybe it does more damage the longer you channel it, for example, right? So as a melee, you'd be rewarded for it. This could also open cool, counterplays to where there's a ton of ads, but I really need to run out because maybe they explode when they die or something like that. So melee has to run out first, or whatever. Or maybe it's spiteful, and spiteful are gonna pop out of it. So right before the ads start dying, you could cast your bubble and start an empowered consecration and do that. Like that's like a cool thing that came to my mind when it came to this. So I think those are the type of things that I want to see, at least. I know not every Ret Paladin's going to agree with me on this, but those are the kinds of things that I would want to see from Ret that would make it just more fun to play. Obviously, I'm assuming that all these things are going to do good damage to where we get to stay at the very least in the middle of the pack. I would like to see something that takes a little bit of skill, like Execution Sentence, vault you to the top or near the top, because it is a thing. Like almost anybody can play Survival Hunter and Demo Warlock right now to a pretty high level, because they aren't exceptionally hard to play. Even fairly casual people, right? Not the most casual people, but even fairly casual. I mean, Demo Warlock, you pretty much just cast Rain of Fire for the most part. It's not that hard, but with Execution Sense, it takes a monochrome of skill. Some people can't do it without having a weak aura telling them what spell to cast. Some people just screw up because they can't do something consistently time and time again. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. But I'm saying if you can do that, I think you should get rewarded for doing perfect amount of globals. And it's been a while, so 8 seconds. To do the perfect amount of globals in 8 seconds, I think you should get rewarded for that. I truly do. So yeah, And then as far as and then I did try to put a little bit of thought into PvP. This is not normally like a PvP centered channel, but I do think the issues. I'm actually probably going to do a PvP video about why I don't really like PvP in WoW anymore. Because I used to love it, and my if you look at my honorable kills as each expansion goes out, it probably goes down like exponentially each expansion. In but like so the Ret is not bad in PvP. PvP is very good for burst, and Ret has good burst, so Ret's not bad in PvP by any means. It's never like truly bad. The problem is it's other things that make it bad. The number one thing I would say though that I would change a million things about PvP before I would make Ret stronger, right? But if I only had to choose to make Ret stronger, number one thing I would change is to make Divine Shield actually freaking matter. I'm sick of Divine Shield not mattering anymore. I'm sick of if I queue into twos with a buddy just for fun, and maybe maybe I'm carrying a bit or whatever because I have better gear, I play more or whatever, so I'm just naturally better. I hate queuing into like a priest warrior in twos and knowing that I just do not have a Divine Shield because it can be Shattering Throat or Mass Dispelled pretty much instantly, and I just don't get to have it. And I also don't get to have Blessing and Protection either against a warrior. So I absolutely hate that. I think Divine Shield should just not be removable. I think it should be this OP bubble. It's our only real defensive. Shield of Vengeance is more of a damage spell than it is a defensive. It's our only real defensive against everything. And yet in PvP, it could just be removed instantly by very meta classes in the game. Just absolutely removed and absolutely deleted. And I don't think that that's very fun to play in as a Paladin in general. Definitely not as a Ret Paladin. It's a little bit squishy to begin with. It's not very fun to play into that. So that's the number one thing I would change. Make Divine Shield this cool thing for Paladins that, we have the Bubble Hearth, right? You technically can't even Bubble Hearth in PvP anymore because you'll just get removed in one of, a handful of ways. I think it's only a few ways, but still, it's just very annoying. Because those classes are so prevalent. It's not like it's like the least played classes that can remove your bubble. So I would get rid of that. But like I said, there's a million other things. Not a million, but there's just so many other things I would change about PvP in general before I worried about that. But if I had to play PvP in the current state, I'd at least have more fun if I at least had my bubble every match. I think that's not very much to ask for, honestly. As a Paladin, that's like one of your core things of why you're even playing a Paladin, possibly, if you started playing back in the day, because of the whole idea of, Bubble Hearth. That used to be a very, meme thing. I don't know if it still is, back in the day. And so, that's a cool thing about playing a Paladin. But yeah. So that's it for this one, guys. Those are some of the ways that I would improve Ret Paladin for Dragonflight. Let me know how you guys would improve it. It's fine if you disagree with me. Try not to be too mean about it. But it's fine if you disagree. As always, I do ask you to please subscribe to the channel. It helps me out so much. Other than that, everybody, have a good one.